maybe in the workshop is pretty much practical, but I have some slides at the beginning and at the beginning of some sections too, because it's more visual. So we're doing the workshop in server-side rendering of React with Symfony, which is kind of for some people a weird combination, but I don't understand so much why, because it works pretty well. And I'm Nacho Martin. I work in a company called Imenius, and we have been using Symfony like for 9, 10 years, something like that. And we are very happy with React, so we build projects for customers, and whatever they want to be built is, we try to build them, to build it. And at the beginning, as you know, applications were mostly like 90% backend and then some frontend on top of it. But with the time, the requirements in many cases is like, well, you need to put more and more frontend. And at some point we choose Angular. We didn't like it so much. And some years ago we tried with React, and we are really happy with it. And we were trying to find ways to provide an integration better with in some aspects for some projects, which can be, which for instance people in Ruby on Rails were doing, and was working well for some companies, and it's a technique that works pretty well. So, yeah, thank you. So first is what's the problem that server-side rendering addresses? Like, it's for every application in the world. It's for what is exactly what the advantages that we have. So we can choose if we want to invest in it, or even if we want to learn it or not. So, well, as you know, this is the first web page ever published, and this has a statement like right in the middle of it. We are providing access to documents. So the web was born as a way to provide access to documents, so just like static content. And this is what makes like the beginnings of things, make things great in its own way, but they present problems in the future because of the basic idea they had. So it has consequences, right? I mean, it has been tremendously successful, but it has some drawbacks that we have, as an industry, we had to solve or to find workarounds around them. So yeah, basically this means what was at the beginning. You present the client arrives, you send them an HTML page, and they see the document. And at some point, we felt that we needed to add some dynamic elements, like, I don't know, maybe validation in a form. The password is not long enough before they submit, or things like that. And we were doing fine with just adding a thin layer of JavaScript with like kind of some enriched documents. So remember, like, well, first was even before jQuery, but then jQuery was like the king of this era, where you just go to the document object model and then you say, manipulate it somehow, depending on the direction of the user. And yeah, so now we can do stuff, like modify a document, but we cannot still load new content based on user interaction. So that we also wanted that. Like, for instance, we have this paginated page, which is typical in many content-based pages or applications. And we want that when the user clicks on the page 2, maybe we don't want a full refresh because we have like quite a lot of, we want a way to load this content from the server. So that's why we had Ajax. So we provide also an API with raw data, and the data is just understood by JavaScript, and it can refresh this part. This is quite straightforward. So this means that what we can do if our application is complex enough, as it was growing in complexity, is at the end, what you do is I prepare the static part that doesn't change, and then I leave kind of a placeholder, like for instance Gmail, leaves a placeholder, a huge placeholder, and says, let's wait a bit until I load the content for you, like I load the emails, and then I just plug them in the middle of the page, and then after that, this is an application like a desktop application. So so you have some part of the DOM which comes from the server as HTML, as an HTML string, and part of it that is kind of injected from JavaScript in the browser that understands the document object model and can make adjustments to it. So The problem is that even if this works very well in something that we can call an application, like a desktop application, like Gmail, if our project is still like kind of content-based, the first thing the user sees is this, and also crawlers. So crawlers really don't know or have problems to parse this information. So if our project is not really a pure application, I don't know, for instance, like admin panels and so on, and we still want to make it fast load times, and we still want to have some search engine optimization, or the best search engine optimization, this is problematic. Like, for instance, these numbers are from DoubleClick, so this is the Google, part of the Google advertising behemoth. So it's based on revenue, based on advertisement, but they found, like, it was like 1.5 years ago, I think it was, the average time for 3G is like 19 seconds, 53% of sites that take longer than 3 seconds are abandoned, and going from 19 seconds to 5 seconds means like, at the end means like double the revenue, which is something that, like, as a company, double is quite nice. So it's problematic to make them wait and wait and wait for a spinner, even if we don't even consider search engine optimization, just for the user experiences, is maybe not the best. So, this technique of server-side rendering is most useful when you are in a project that has content, like with like thousands of landing pages, or at least landing pages that are meant to be found by Google or found by the users like instant. It's not so important when you have a user that will load the page, can afford to wait like, I don't know, even 30 seconds because they need this admin panel and they will stay in the admin panel for 1 hour maybe or whatever. In this case of kind of desktop applications in the browser, it's beatable. But in content pages, probably if you feel like you cannot adapt something like React or a new framework, and you have to stay with different technologies, so you will have as many options for making the page dynamic, for instance. Then what we want is, instead of having this part of the tree empty, waiting for the API to load the stuff, what we want is to provide the initial state in the HTML right away, so rendered by the server. And then, this is Tobias with me. Okay. Yeah, and then when the user makes something or some interaction or something, and we need to change it, then we may want to re-render the page. Maybe not with jQuery, but it's easy to explain it with jQuery because everyone knows this kind of syntax. Also, what we want is not to have 2 different systems to represent this content. So we don't want to like build the templates in Twig and also build, for instance, the things in React just to have first load and then a new reload from JavaScript. So as we don't have the choice of running, for instance, PHP in the browser, we have to choose one of them. The choice we have to do is to run some JavaScript from the server side to provide this first initial load. Then, so we need a way to run our client-side application from the server. Then I was talking with people, and apparently there is this idea that then you need to do everything in JavaScript, like, because if you want to run JavaScript in the server, then you must do. But for me, like in the real world, has some implications, like if your engineers are experts, for instance, in PHP, or for the sake in Ruby on Rails, then happens that you have to fire them or something. Like, I mean, it's like, what are you telling me? I mean, just because I have this problem, I have to rewrite my complete application in Node.js. For me, it's like no sense. It's true that it's more natural. I mean, it's the same language, but maybe it's not the right choice for the project because maybe the people has knowledge of PHP. Maybe people think that PHP is better for the task, or maybe the project already exists and we cannot afford. I mean, if we go to the CEO and tell them that we need server-side rendering, so we're going to write this application, it will be like, what are you telling me? Or maybe we want to combine it. For instance, one project I saw, they had this main view that they wanted to make in React, but they had this form in the side, like as a Twig template, and it was a form that they were using for for receiving all the for selling, and it had inside a lot of templates for stuff they were doing and so on, and they had this and had invested a lot of money into this, and so you cannot say like, let's just trash it away. Like, or for instance, a project we saw, they tried to put some React in it, and they really needed server-side rendering because they were content-based, so totally content-based. And this is a way, for instance, to start doing server-side rendering PHP. It's a way to do some A/B testing, try to convince so how is this work? It's okay, it's not, and then we invest more or less depending on how it goes. It's more than the other idea of rewriting things. And also, I think it's a very good way to learn this technique, because when you are doing it in JavaScript, as you have the same language in the client side and the server side, you may be lost in what is running what. And in PHP, it's super clear because you have different language, and it's very clear the boundaries of what you are doing. So yeah, with this short explanation, let's just run some JavaScript from PHP. And so you have a folder of the workshop prepared, but for the first two sections, I would rather just you to create in your home directory a new folder. Okay. Well, this is if you open this website, I think you can read it. Oh, should I do it bigger? Maybe. Okay. This is Control right, Control plus. Or I can run it in my, outside this I control better. Now it's better? Well, you can open these slides this website, like sfreact.com, and then you will have the tutorial. The tutorial contains whole code and exercises and everything. So I will do it in a medium pace. So if you feel like you get bored at some point, maybe you can advance a bit. I mean, it's no problem for me. If you feel like you are a bit lost, then you can, at the end of every section or at some points, you will find that there is this, you can go to a tag, check out a tag, and then you can get the files in there, or so you can compare, or you can just directly go to that point. The code in here, and so on. I mean, does this open for you? I don't know the state of the Wi-Fi. So what we are going to have, there are 7 sections here. The third section of Encore, I don't think we are going to do it because the work by Encore is very interesting, but I find that the library doesn't need so much explanation, so I prefer to spend the time in all the other sections. But still, you have the content if you want to check it out later. And I mean, so what we want to do is at the end, I published some libraries to do this. And one of the options of this workshop was to use the libraries right from the beginning. But then I feel that even me, I forget what the libraries are doing because they are kind of layers on top of some low-level stuff. So I prefer that at the beginning we just do things in the low level, and then at some point I will tell you, let's use this library to replace this part that we were doing by hand. So then if afterwards you want to use the libraries and so on, you know what is exactly going, like the problems that are being solved in there. Because they are quite easy problems, but they are kind of tricky sometimes. So if you create a project and then go into it and then just create a composer project just for being able to install, we only need a dependency which is Symfony process. And what we are going to do is the simplest server-side program that we may think of. So if you copy this into index.php, there is this code in JavaScript. So this is the easiest thing we can do, like 1 + 1, and show the result in the browser. So also this is like a way to check if everything is working in your environments. Yeah. So if you copy this into index.php, and then you open, like run the PHP server and visit the page. You should see this, so we wait a bit for everyone to Composer init and so on. The Wi-Fi is working, right? I mean, well, I mean, no problems with Composer and so on. By the way, if you have any question at any moment, I mean, we are few people. It should be very easy to address everything. So this work for you, Hugo? No, didn't work for you?
It works, yeah.
Okay, and I hope.
Hopefully I have a node on my machine.
You what?
I
But
feel like I didn't have node, but it seems like node is installed on my machine.
but you have, I mean, you have the virtual environment provided. Ah, okay, that's.
I don't have enough space on my
Okay, okay.
huge VM.
Yeah. Well, so you have the virtual environment installed, like the virtual environment of the workshops installed. For instance, you have the virtual environment like this virtual machine. Okay, good, because I was like supposing that, expecting to be installed. Well, so Victoria, you think more or less? You think?
I'm not a JavaScript guy. I try to reconcile myself with JavaScript stuff. But when you
Yeah.
process std out on these are some JavaScript packages or
Yeah. So this is we are going to do this. The thing is that it's easy. The concept is easy, but we are going to do some tricks to get it right, which is something that I only do, for instance, for this library. So I'm going to explain all this stuff, but yeah. So the thing is, we need this kind of code to wrap our code, which is something we typically won't do in JavaScript because we just say, just run this and it's run. But what we are going to do is to call node in the first example is just saying run this thing that is coming for you in the command line. So we just open a process like with a fork, and just it's like make the PHP open a terminal and say node -e and then my program, which is this. As we have 1 + 1, we need to evaluate it to convert it to a string and then to write it in the standard output. These are the things that the library at the end you will see that solves for you. So because the concept is very easy, you just have to run JavaScript from it. But there are some nuances because of this, like standard output, standard input that maybe, at least myself, I'm not so used to do in my everyday life. Like, so you should see something like this. And yeah, so you have eval of the program you have, this toString, and write it. And this is what we call a runner. So this runner is very simple. It's kind of a code that wraps other stuff to run it. Other runners, for instance, may forbid you from using, like the library, for instance, will forbid you from using things like set timeout or things like that. That doesn't make sense in a server-side environment, like wait for some seconds and then do something, because it kind of defeats the point of server-side rendering. But this case is very simple. So let's improve it a bit so that we see what the problems problems we have, like this kind of what is standard output. And so if you change the code instead of 1 + 1 to something like, well, a variable that is not defined, if you change it, you will see that at the current state of in our program, you just will see that there is no output. Okay? So we don't have any error handling. So many things that we give for granted are not in there yet. So we have to provide ways to have it, because every programming language has that, but when we run a programming language from another programming language, we start losing these kind of things, and we have to kind of find ways around it. So, but in this case, for instance, error handling will be something like, instead, at the end of our program, we can say, my program is this program, the exit code is Symfony process component, which is very handy for this, gives us back the exit code of the process that has been run. If it's 0, it means successful execution. If it's another code, it means that there is an error, so we can have some information. And then we have the output and the error output. So in this case, if you change this to 1 plus whatever, 1 plus potato or whatever, you will see something like error output, undefined. This unknown defined is not defined, so you can at least not get lost in the process. So then, more things we want to do, just basic things is, for instance, if we want to run this code, which is multi-line, we will, again, have problems because we are using node-e run my code, and as we are kind of running in the terminal will complain. So we have to find another way to do this. Yeah, you want to try this. For instance, you will see, it's also, I think it's from programming things, it's very useful to familiarize yourself with the errors because it's the world that you have to live with in the real day. So if you try this thing, which is just changing the 1 plus 1, with this, now that we have error output, if you have done this, oh, it's so hot here. Yeah, so we are kind of running it from the terminal. So multi-line programs won't work. And also we have problems when, even if we can make it fit in one line, the terminals have limitation, and there are these kind of limitations that we don't want to mess around with because every operating system have different, and it's better not to rely on this. I mean, this is not the best way to do this. We are just overcoming the limitations. So if you saw this problem, if you change your PHP program, and we explain what it's about, what we are going to try next, the next thing is to write the JavaScript code into a temporary file, and then tell Node, just execute this file. It will be like, we are growing our environment to solve one problem at a time.
If someone is completely lost, please raise up your hand so that we can help.
Yeah, or if you feel like going too slow or faster, because I don't have the feeling of where are you, so if you feel like it's too slow or too fast, because I can just guess what the point you are. Okay. So you try this. I mean, this is something I cannot do in live coding because I wouldn't remember. But what it's doing is creating a temporary file, and then put this code into it. So we had the code, we wrap it into this standard output eval something, we create a temporary file, and then we run it, not with node-e, but with node run my program, like node application JavaScript, whatever, application.js. Then that should work still. Now you will see that you have changed here in the runner. This is the kind of tricks that the library is about, at least at this stage. That you have, for instance, to do JSON encode to, for instance, convert this -n, like end of line characters, into a string representation so it can fit into our program. So this is the kind of tricks we have to face just to have multi-line support or not, and so on. So then there is another concept that is very important for us. As we are running now Node.js, which is like the slowest thing we can do, but it's very obvious what it's doing. But the thing is that basically what we are going to have, the problem we are going to have every time, is that we will have typically a quite big application written in JavaScript, like hundreds of kilobytes or maybe megabytes. And this application won't change between requests. So what will change is the parameters we pass to it. Like, I have this application, I want to render page 3 with these filters or whatever, so please give me the result. But the application never changed. So it's a good practice to split this code into this. So there is a context and something that changes. So if this is super important, because for instance, if we can cache the evaluation of the context, everything will be much faster, and we can share this part with the client side. So, and then this is what changes from requests. Let's say that we want to sum different numbers every time. So then our code is a context and something that has some variation. I call it variant. I made it up, the name variant. So yeah, this expresses what we will want to do, right? So what we typically want to do is to load the context from a file, right? So instead of having, as we were doing, the context here from like a PHP string embedded that without syntax highlighting and a pain for you to write, or some JavaScript developer will be painful to write your application in here, we can just create a new file called app.js. So now we have index.php and app.js. And we make the context load this application JS. So let's try this, like to have this in place. So these concepts are quite simple, but you find sometimes that the environment is not perfect. You have to solve these kind of issues with error handling, not. Yeah, so, well, in the next section we will have a full replacement of the code, so don't worry so much. But yeah, so we need a code that is the context and the variant, and at the beginning we just split into, and then, well you saw it. Just if someone else has this problem. But yeah, so this is it. So we can refine this and this more and more, or we can use a library, because I mean every project will have the same situations, or will have the same needs. We'll need some error handling. We'll need, for instance, maybe we want to run in development Node.js, but in production maybe you want to run something else. There is a PHP extension that embeds the JavaScript virtual machine, and it has better caching and so on. So you may say, my library would be good to use this in development, this in production, these kind of options. So at some point I wrote this library, this based on what I basically kind of copied what the people in Ruby had, because they are solving the same problem. So this is this library, PHP exec.js, which is you use it like as a black box. It kind of works, but then now after this section, I think if sometimes you find a problem in it, or then you know what the problem is solving, because it's opening files, creating temporary files, is removing the temporary, making sure that the temporary files are removed, and so on. So if you install it, then we can start removing code from our application and just make the library use it, just knowing the kind of problems that the library is solving, which are the kind of boring problems that take some time to get right because of the new lines, some characters, some escaping, not working. And from this we can start growing, put some Symfony, put some React on top of it. So if you install this, which if the Wi-Fi is right, the library is quite small, you should be able to change your code to this, and it should still work. If I'm going to stop here, if it doesn't work for some of you, or library has a few more stuff, like if you are using this extension. The problem with the extension is super fast. The problem with the extension is to compile it. To compile it takes, like, for me, it's quite complicated to get it right, compiling it. And there was this guy who was providing packages, for instance, for Mac. But at some point he got tired, which I understand that providing packages is kind of something. And like for instance, I cannot tell the people in the workshop to install it because it's nightmarish to install this. Hopefully, I mean, luckily we don't need it to get performance, as we see in the last section. But this is an option. If you you have the possibility of using this extension called not sure if, well, V8.js. Not sure if it's working now. Okay. It's much faster than Node.js, as we will see in the last section, because you can cache this context and things like that. So this worked for you, this action? Like you have to install the library and then change the PHP code. If you see what we are doing, it's create context from file, which is doing what we were doing of creating a temporary file and so on. And it will just, when we say eval.js, it will wrap our code into a runner, and it will just execute it. So we hide these parts from, we don't have to write our application writing this low-level stuff every time. Yeah, so the Wi-Fi now, for me, is terrible. I don't know. This is kind of the basics. We are not running React, but we are running some JavaScript. As you see, you have a feeling, for instance, if we wanted to run jQuery, that depends on document manipulation, we never have a document. We are always getting a string back. So everything that has to do with please modify the document, it won't work. It's just pure code. So some stuff works, some doesn't. Some libraries work with this technique, some doesn't. React and Vue, because of the fundamental concept we are going to explain in the fourth section, work very well with this, that you can do everything with it, but the kind of a previous stage of JavaScript where libraries were manipulating aggressively document object model or Angular 1, for instance, you cannot do these kind of things. It's like, it's a no. It's because you need to have a browser somehow embedded in there, and you don't have it, or you shouldn't have it, or it's a much harder problem. So this is kind of solves the problem of executing some JavaScript in there. We'll see more integrations with the particular case of React. But what we will want to do next, and we have this, is to have a much complex JavaScript application, like with dependency management to use packages, modern JavaScript, or maybe JS6, or React is typically written in this dialect of JavaScript called JS6. It has some templating, kind of templating in there. You want to bundle everything in one file to create this context file based on all the dependencies. And we want to have something that we can also share with the client-side app application. And well, many other things that there's a tool that works perfectly, which is Webpack. So we are going to give a very short introduction into, oh, sorry, Webpack. Because my wife is really terrible. Not really. Maybe here. No, not connected anymore. Yeah. So I'm going to do the slides of this part, which are tiny, and then not working. Okay, well, yeah. So Webpack, it's quite of a huge topic. I mean, there is 2 rooms from here. There is a room like devoted for 3 hours on Webpack. We are going to explain a bit of Webpack and a bit of React as well, just for the points of common that we have with what we want to do. It's a very interesting topic to explore, but we don't need to. Luckily, we don't need to explain all of it to showcase what we want to do. That's the basic idea. So Webpack, if you remember, in Symfony we had tools like Ascetic, or like every framework had some tool for managing assets. But after the front-end explosion, kind of the standard is to use something like Webpack, which is a huge project, takes some time to learn, but I think it's worthwhile. And basically what it does is you have modules with dependencies, and you can control, or you try to produce an output. Maybe it's different in production, you want it to be minified, maybe it takes some time to build it, uglify it, but in development you want something comfortable that just reloads the page for you if you make some changes and so on. So Webpack does all of this beautifully. And in our case, we typically will want to have 2 Webpack setups. So we typically have JavaScript, images, everything. And that is our client-side application. And in our server-side application, we typically only need like JavaScript, maybe TypeScript, I mean everything that compiles down to JavaScript, but we don't need the other stuff. Maybe they are similar setups, but have in mind you can have 2 different Webpack configurations for producing these 2 final bundles, that one for serving to the browsers, one for the server side. So basically, Webpack, what the configuration file is, which is where you do everything, you have to export an object with some sections. There are kind of 3 main sections. The 2 first section you learn is, or more important, is you need an input, so the entry points of your code, like the code that it's like the main point that imports other code. And you have to say the files that will be generated and where they will be generated, which is quite simple, but it still has some complications, and they solve it very well. And then we have to provide Webpack with a set of rules, like what to do with a JavaScript file, or what to do with a TypeScript file. Please use this compiler, or use this thing, or what to do with a PNG or CSS file. So we have rules for dealing with that, and we are just going to write a small configuration because we need it, and we have so a feeling of what it's about, the Webpack. So we can, let's see if I have, well, it's here, because here I have to make it bigger. I don't know how to. No. Okay, now it's working for me. Yeah. So we have to install it, and then I want you to run these two instructions to install some Webpack and the client, the command line interface, and then a dependency. While you install it, I explain you something about this dependency, in case. So this dependency, which is for me paradigmatic of what happens with dependencies in JavaScript, is a dependency that is just used for doing a left path. So when you have, like, for instance, a 7, and you want to build James Bond number, you can say path 7 with 2 zeros. Or if you have 17, it will say 0, 17. So it's kind of, I think it's 14 lines of code. The guy who authored this library had 250 packages, and at some point he got in an argument with the NPM platform. So he decided to unpublish all his stuff. And apparently left path was used like in almost every project in JavaScript. So it kind of wrote a lot of mayhem, like for 1 day, 2 days, like then was quite of chaotic. So as we are going to explain dependencies, let's use this dependency for the glory of this moment that happened.
We do it at the root of the Symfony application.
No, sorry. Yeah. I mean, in the first, you are using all the time the root of the Symfony application. I mean, I just
executed your npm
okay.
install, but at the root of the SF React.
Okay.
So it should be in your clean folder, the one you created for the first section.
You created one in the first section or not?
Yes.
Okay. If you, I mean, you're not breaking anything, but if you can go back to the first section. Because yeah, in the first section and second section, we have like this super clean environment without anything installed. And then we install all the heavy stuff and work with it. So we are going to create kind of secret agent codes like 007. It's not really exciting, but at least gives us a topic for the rest of the workshop. You have to forgive me because when I wrote this, I said spy, and James Bond is not exactly a spy. It's a secret agent, but, well. So if you change, you have to create the src directory and put an index.js file with this code, which basically says, we'll create 007, 008, stuff. And if you run Webpack, because Webpack 4 doesn't need any configuration at all for the simplest case, which is this one, you should see that there is a main.js file. It is possible if you are using PHP Storm that you don't see it because I think PHP Storm considers it a hidden file, like a file that is not useful for the developer. So if you can kind of open it somehow, you will see something like this. Moment like this. Yeah, so this is kind of what Webpack produces if you are in development mode. Typically, it will complain that you are not saying the mode, and you will see probably the code for production, which is like just a single line. But what it's doing is something like that. So it's producing slightly longer code, but has all the dependency injection, not injection, management and so on in there. So it will typically complain that you didn't set the mode option, and it creates a production bundle. If you try this, you will see this kind of file where you can still kind of debug it, or at least, well, has some information like these tags or which file are in there and so on. I have an error? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Webpack files.
Okay, it should be in src. So the file should be in src index.js. So this file, if you,
Oh yes, I forgot to solve that.
yeah, I mean, it happens to me all the time with this workshop is about configuring and installing things, and happens all the time for me as well. Like, where are things supposed to be? Yeah, npx is, you have two ways of installing packages in the Node.js world. One is you install it globally, so you have a global command line package. Or if you install locally, then you can say execute it, like execute my local package. So if you have several projects, I think it's best practice because you may have different versions in different projects. This one executes exactly the version you have just installed in your project. Yeah, so because also there was like another Webpack workshop, and they may be using different Webpack stuff. I prefer just to, but this, yeah, it's a good question because I always forget that that I'm doing it. I think Composer has this kind of thing. No. Yeah, you have installing bin, and you have to use it. Yeah. So if you check the code, it's typically, people don't do that, but for us it's particularly interesting to see what is in there. So we can now make JavaScript, use this source code as the code that changes. Okay, so if we change, we say PHP exec.js, create context from file, and change this variant code. I don't know if, yeah, it's different than from the previous one. It should say something like 007, because it's doing this, adding 3 plus 4, and using padding left or left pad. Yeah. Works for you? Okay, thanks. So once this is done, let's write some Webpack configuration. This is, if you create a file in the root of your project called webpack.config.js, and you put this in there. It is the default configuration. So it will do exactly the same as we did. So Webpack in the last version said people were complaining about having to configure it, so said that there was a default configuration. This is the same thing. So it doesn't matter if you create this file or not, but it's kind of the starting point that Webpack expects. It's not the best. We're not lucky, for instance, as Symfony users, as it tries to, it hopes that the file is in SRC, so we will have to configure it because it will clash with our Symfony application. And typically we want this to be in public and not in dist. But well, this is done for front-end developers, so it's, yeah. So there are this kind of exercise or, well, in this case it's quite easy. Like, could we make the read instead of from client? That will be what we will do, for instance, in Symfony, or a client or assets is another option, typical option in Symfony. Or yeah, we will want to make it right into public main.js. Don't do it because we are kind of depend of having this in the next steps, but it will be pretty easy just to change public with this with public and SRC with client and so on. So now it's when the interesting part comes, is that we are going to use React, and React uses a particular JavaScript flavor, but you may want to use whatever JavaScript flavor, or even TypeScript or CoffeeScript. I don't think many people uses it, but it's a possibility, for instance. So let's just say that you are very following like the latest developments in the JavaScript world, and you see that there is a proposal. It's not even in the standard itself, but you see that there is this, when you have this kind of construction, where you compose functions, there is this proposal to use a pipe operator, like a Unix pipe, so you can sum stuff, and then the output of this, the result of this function call is put as input of the next function, and we kind of say, okay, let's try. So for this, so we have to install a basic library that is used in every project in JavaScript, I think, or every modern project. You have to install Babel, which at the moment has this problem of happens sometimes that they are in the transition from 7 to 8. But if you install this, it's not super crucial that we get this right, but if you install this, you should have a good environment. At least yesterday, it was the right exactly version. So installing this stuff, now we can place this. We have entries and outputs, and now we can start saying rules. So this is typical work with Webpack. In this case, we say everything that is a .js or JSX maybe file, or in the family of JavaScript, excluding node modules, because node modules are the dependencies we have and they are already prepared. Use Babel to transpile it, so to convert it from one JavaScript version to the version the standard version. So this, as we have now, doesn't do anything right now. We didn't say we want to use this particular flavor of JavaScript, but we have a more complete Webpack configuration. And then Babel expects you to have some configuration itself, like what you want to do with JavaScript. You want which version you want as input, which version as output. The typical stuff you can do is to write this in the root of your project, Babel RC file, and then create this line. It means this particular preset is very useful in browsers. For instance, you can say, please support the new JavaScript and compile it So we can support like 99% of the browsers that are now in the world. Things like that you can do it with Babel. Like, I don't want it to compile it into 2015, but I just want to be sure that I support like the last 5 version of Chrome and Explorer, 99% of users of Explorer, things like that. If we run this preset, it means just use the latest standard, so the standard of 2017, standard of 2016, and the standard of 2015, which are combined. Yeah. I think it's then. So this, if you run Webpack after doing that, it should work the same. And then we can use the new thing we found in the internet that we wanted to try, and that will be useful for us when we do the React work. If you want to do this, you are really interested, like, but this is about configuration. I'm not super excited about reading about configuration, but if you read about Babel preset, for instance, there is a section about which browsers you want to target, which is quite useful. Or you can say, for instance, I want to target, if you are running server-side code, I want to target these node versions. This is kind of learning your compiler flags, things like that. So for server-side rendering, if we are really going into the detail, you should say which node version are we supporting, maybe if we have different environments in our company, and then maybe in client-side in client-side rendering, we want to produce a version of JavaScript that it's supported by browsers. So at the end, we are running some stuff in the server, and we want to make sure that Node.js or whatever we are using understands it. But we may produce a different version of the code for browsers, because maybe browsers we want to support, they don't support the latest features. So we have 2 versions of, at the end, it's the same application, but we don't use the same features in the output code. So which is quite useful for us, to have 2 different tools or 2 different ways of building, at the end, as the same JavaScript application. If you think like compiling C program, you may compile it for Linux, and you may compile it for Mac. It's kind of similar, but typically, if you just do something like this, it works in both environments pretty well. But there are always like things you can adjust. So finally, if you install this plugin, which is like a kind of, I think this is quite neat from the JavaScript community. You want to install a proposal. So you want to try the new proposal that we are discussing, if it's useful for you or not. So you install this plugin of Babel, and you say, I want to try the proposal of the pipeline operator. Then you change it, you configure it. So this is a very early stage. They have 4 stages, and this stage means the community is experimenting with it. So it's like kind of the most experimental thing we can do. And in this case, there are even several implementations. People are like championing different implementations. We're going to use one of which is minimal. So we just configured in Babel RC. We say, OK, I want to use this plugin. And now, from this moment, if we can rewrite our code to read like this. If you see even the syntax highlighting, I have breaks with this syntax because it's a proposal. But this code, if you have this Babel RC, will just work. And if you run npx webpack, it should work. I mean, I wait here. This is the end of the section, because now, after this, we are really going to do the Symfony and React thing. But now, the thing is that we can execute arbitrary code, and we can execute it in any flavor we may want of JavaScript or whatever. So we are quite free in that sense. And from this point, we are going just to restrict ourselves into doing things that are particular with React. This work for you or not? Okay. Yeah, because after now, we will just have this huge setup. Or, I mean, what I consider huge compared with this of Symfony, React, and everything. It's difficult to know exactly where the bytes are moving, which is easier if you have this kind of introduction, I think. So now, as you may know, Symfony created a wrapper on top of Webpack called Webpack Encore. Right? I'm just not going to do the exercise in this section because the thing is that Webpack Encore makes it much easier. You can stay with Webpack Encore. I really encourage you to really learn Webpack. I think it's very interesting that Symfony has this tool so you have a quick, smooth introduction into the framework without having to spend some time learning Webpack. Webpack Encore, if you are a bit familiar with Webpack, you will see that you are creating files like this one. So it's like output is this, entry is this, the public path is this, so it's more verbose. You are not using the syntax we had before, which is more powerful but more confusing. But it's exactly the same, it's producing exactly the same result. So we are not going to get into detail with this, but we are going to use in the next section. I think if you wrote this output, entry, and so on, it's pretty clear what this Webpack Encore is doing. So with this, we can just go into the React thing, which is the most interesting part, I think. And we do the introduction, and then we have some coffee, and then we do the rest of the second part of the tutorial. So this is I don't know if you're familiar with React or not here. You know some React, some of you? Okay, I was expecting that. I really like that. So I'm going to give a short introduction, at least so we can write some React code. It's of course a topic for not a framework, but not a workshop, but much more time. But with some introduction, it's quite possible to write React code in a short time. Because the thing is that React has it's not like a framework has you have like 100 tools and you have to memorize all of them. But what it has is like 2-3 fundamental concepts, and you have to get used to them. But it's kind of always the same. I was talking with some people, React developers here, and they like, oh, I learned this. I was so excited like 2 years ago. Now it's like every time is the same because the concepts are the same. They are powerful concepts, but not many of them. So we can cover them in not so much time. So this is a typical tutorial of a JavaScript application. It's the to-do application. We have a to-do, and let's say that, for instance, the user wants to cook an omelette, and then writes these instructions, and at some point discovers that instead of an omelette, he gets scrambled eggs. So he wants to add a new item in here. Needs to have this possibility. So when we want to do this exact thing, or we want to reorder the 2 items, we have the option of re-rendering everything, or to be smart and just re-render the stuff that have changed. So this is the core of the problem. So we have 2 options. We just focus on the state, and we have an array of the items. And then if something changes, we say, whenever I change this array, I just clear the page and I re-render everything. And this is super elegant. The code that you produce is super elegant because you are just focusing in one array. Everything can be unit tested. It's super neat. Like I have sorts and so on. But the problem is that it's not efficient at all. If you have like 1 million elements, it will be blinking all the time. So at the end, even if the developer experience is perfect, you cannot do that. So you have to resort always to this, to find the document object model if these 2 elements have switched places, or which elements are affected by the thing, what to move, what to remove, and so on. So this is super annoying. or quite annoying. You have to write optimizations, find nodes, find what is going on. It's the parent, it's the sibling, it's whatever. But at the end, it's efficient, so we have to do it. That's how things work. So the fundamental thing of React is that it tells us you can pretend or work as if you were doing the first one, and I have an algorithm of reconciliation that is pretty efficient, and you can reuse it from different applications because it has nothing to do with your particular code, and the engineers in Facebook wrote it. And so we do the second thing behind the scenes, so we are smart about what is going to be manipulated or not. But you have your experience of writing changes of a state, which is much better or much focused in the business you want to do. So what React tells you is, please give me a state, so you manage the state of whatever, an array, an object, and give me a render method that I can call whenever I want. And I see the state you have at this point, and I have a render method, and I know how to render. So that's it. Forget about doing it exactly in this time, at this moment, or whatever. No, I will do it for you. So let's just write a simple React component, which is just when people clicks, when the user clicks, we increment the counter. This component will be the sort of component we're going to write. They are quite simple. And so let's see how, this is a full component. This is fully functional. And most of the components we are going to write, they are at most at this level of complexity. Typically, components are not super complex things. At least, no, basically it should be like this. I mean, if you are doing something like if you're clean, should look like this. It's not just for the tutorial. So we have here like things to notice is you provide an initial state. In the case the component needs a state, some components don't even need a state. In this case, is count. The state is just an object. Count 1. And then you have methods, internal methods, your methods, to produce a new version of the state. It's not changing the state, but it's to produce a new slice, new version. You are not directly. It's better not to think about mutating the state, but about producing new versions of the state. And then, with this, if you call setState, then React may say, okay, maybe now I need to reflect these changes. And at some point, but it's not synchronous, it will call render. And render, you have to provide a representation of every possible state that is valid in your application. Like, in this case, it's simple. You have the number of clicks, and you provide an event handler, which is when the user clicks, we call the function tick, so we increment the counter. And basically, that's the core concept of React, that you don't call render directly, and render is a pure function that just renders stuff, and you have to focus on the state. And so things about working with the state, producing a new version of the state is always an object. It's like key value thing. You can have more complex objects in here, but typically it's like this. You know, some keys, some values, something. And then, to assign state, we have to call setState. I mean, at the beginning it's just, you forget and you say state equals something like that. No, you have to call setState, so React knows that maybe it needs to render the stuff. Maybe it will batch the different updates, or maybe we'll do something different. We'll try to do the most efficient thing, but you have always to call setState. Then, apart from it, we have the render part and JS6. So JS6, some people find it ugly. If you look at what the transpilation of JS6 is quite decent. So it's only JavaScript. Also, it has a very straightforward. I mean, I cannot by heart translate that Twig template, but if you, after half an hour or so of reading how it works, you can translate by heart JS6. It's very straightforward. You just say, use this component with these arguments and so on. It's just a bit annoying because you have to concatenate them like in here, like in this kind of a structure, which is annoying to do with parentheses. But apart from that, it's not like magic. It's not very magical. So it's not exactly JavaScript, sorry, HTML. You, for instance, you use things like instead of class, you use class name, and you can insert JavaScript values in these pointy brackets. But the most important part is to make render as clean as possible. So when you are starting using React, you have the need to run some code, to do some stuff, and typically, as you have a render method, you say, maybe I put it in render. Render should be only return a statement, and just meant to render this kind of templates, not sending emails or not calculating decimals of PI, not doing anything else than rendering. So when you start growing your application, it's a good sign that your components are very small, and you do that by combining, so creating parents and children that are simple. So in this case, you have this application, we split in very simple components, and what we have is that the parent may pass some state to the children. So some kind of, I call this function with arguments. No, it's not, I'm going to do this. So how does it work? If we have this counter component, now we can call it if it was a kind of an HTML tag. It's just that we are using the counter and we pass a parameter. Like if it was an HTML tag, it will just receive this as the input, kind of as if we were calling a function. So in this case, we have a group of counters, and one will say, hi, your number is 3, dude, and your number, or the other will say, your number is 3, sir, for paying user, something like that, maybe. So how it works is we have in counter, in the parent, let's pass this name, and then the children may access it here, like this props name. So at the end, the render function will be called when the state changes or when the props, the state passed by the parent changes. But it only depends on that, so it's a pure thing. It's not, so and React may call it or not when feels like it's the best time. So you have to produce a render function that represents every possible state that is valid for you in the state, internal state, and what is passed by props. And this is the fundamental thing. Since everything depends on the state, and we are not manipulating the document object model directly, as we will do in jQuery, we can, for instance, render the initial state to an HTML string. Nothing in this process told us that we need to manipulate or have a browser open. So in fact, React is being used also for building mobile applications, because you can have this abstraction, and you don't need a browser. So you don't need the concept of browser, because there is this layer that React will do for you. And this is what allows us to do this kind of thing that we couldn't do, for instance, in jQuery, as you need jQuery, create this element in the browser, and then change this class, whatever. It will be a pain to do server-side rendering. So React and Vue have this property, which is what has all the consequences that there's an emphasis in functional programming, in the purity of functions, and this kind of stuff, and this consequence. How the instructions, exactly instructions that we need to work with this in server-side rendering. We have a method which is render to string. I have this element like counter, and I want to render it to string, and it will just give you the HTML string. And then in the client side, when the browser runs, you can call hydrate. So you will see have render to string creates this HTML, directly from the server, and then if you present this as the initial page and insert it in your template, like I have this pre-populated HTML ready for crawlers and users to see the initial state, that won't react. I mean, it won't react to user input. If there is a button, the button will do nothing because the JavaScript is not running in the browser. When the browser code is executed, maybe 1 second later, 3 seconds later, we will call at some point hydrate, and we say, okay, at this point, root, please hydrate it with this component. And then React will say, okay, I see that it's already rendered. I don't need to render again. But from now on, I take control over it. So this is how server-side rendering works. So it's quite simple. It's just you create an HTML string, and then the client just brings it to life. And now, from now on, for instance, we can start, what we see, writing twig tags that say, this is now, for instance, a React element. Now we have all the pieces we need for doing things like that. Now we have a twig tag that renders twig, typical twig, or a twig tag that does all of this and has a very dynamic React element. So then there is a bundle for this that we wrote based on what the people in Ruby on Rails was doing. And it has, like, the ecosystem is this. We have PHP exec.js that is doing what we saw in the first section. And then there is a renderer, which is the library that does it and provides a twig extension that uses PHP exec.js. Forget about external renderer, what will be the last section. And then there is a bundle. So if you are familiar with Symfony, maybe, some of you? No, you are familiar with Symfony. You are familiar with Symfony, at least you, and these people. So bundles in Symfony, we have libraries. Typically, you split in libraries and in bundles. So React Render could be used, for instance, just for the sake of using it. I use it in WordPress. But then with a bundle, you can have configuration files, dependency injection, and it's like a wrapper. But the functionality is in the render. And we use under the hood for the low-level stuff, PHP exec.js that we used. So you see here there is a React Render says there is a React on Rails integration. We'll see what is this. So when I was writing this or finding how to do this, I found that the people in React Ruby on Rails had been solving it for longer time than in the PHP world. And this guy from Hawaii, as you see, I mean, for me it's pretty clear he's from Hawaii. When I see this photo, he had been writing this library called React on Rails, which has a catchy name if you are from the Rails world, which is, for instance, what the people in Egghead uses for the server-side rendering. And they had a server-side part, kind of like what React Renderer does and React Bundle does. And they had also a client-side part that is going to be running in the browser. So instead of rewriting it, as they are solving exactly the same problem, I thought we can just use it in PHP, and it works very well. They wrote this library. We don't need to write it again. But still has this confusing name for us. It is Rails, because of course they are from the Rails world. But the client side is only JavaScript, so we can use it in PHP, in Python, in whatever. So what we are going to do to use this library is we import components and we register them. So it's just like this. So we kind of declare them in React on Rails. And then in the server part, with the React Renderer, for instance, we put this tag, this twig tag, this twig function, and we say which component do we want and with which initial state. And it will do two things. In server side, we'll render an HTML, and in the client side, we'll render a script tag with information about the component. And then when React on Rails runs in the browser, it will say, OK, this expose component is in the page, so I place React here for the sake of the. And that's it. I mean, I think now we can have the coffee. And we start with this part, which is more exciting, but it's very confusing if you never touch the PHP exec.js thing, because what is going on in there? How is it working? So that's why we start with this introduction. So also, when you have problems with I receive issues with the React Renderer, and sometimes it's like, well, yeah, of course it's because of this, but people don't need to know, and now you know most of what the purpose of the library is. So this is the page of the bundle. This is the page of the renderer, because they are different. And there is a sandbox if you want to, there is a project with everything configured, although you have something similar in this workshop. And if you want to really learn more about this, or typically the people in React on Rails are they have much traction. I don't know why the Ruby on Rails people are so much open to the framework, to front-end um, integration and so on. But they really have very good ideas for, like, there are tiny pieces that we don't have in the bundle or in the renderer that they have. For instance, for caching, they have 3 points where they really cache for better performance in some cases. So in case you go this way, it's very useful to have a look always on what the people in React on Rails are building. Also because they are super committed into it. Like, they have a book written about it and so on. And most of the things we do are solving the same problems they have in React on Rails. So we can apply always the same technique. So for instance, this caching and performance section is something that if you really go this way, maybe you can have a look at it. I'm not going to cover all of this, but I mean, always the Ruby on Rails community for this, for some reason, is a source of inspiration much more than, for instance, the .NET community or Python community. Always these people, the Hawaiian people, are doing great. Also, sometimes, like if you install a new version and so on, they maybe have new features that we are not taking advantage of in the PHP side yet. But you may have a look. Like, if you, by the way, if you use Silex, which is like officially dead, but people use it, there is a Silex service provider that someone wrote. So you may have a look at it. It's just using the React renderer. I think it's a very thin layer on top of it, like thin as this thin. But I don't know, for instance, if you are using something else that is not Symfony, you may have like the Silex service provider is just a wrapper on top of the PHP exec.js, React renderer, and things like that. So you may have a look. It's probably easier than the React bundle, which has more options. Because I think, for instance, people in the WordPress community can, if they want to have React applications, can use it and works pretty well. So I don't know. Depending on your case, you may have a look or not, or whatever. And I think we should continue. What, Victoria, what do you think? Yeah. So yeah. So now it's the time where we should really go to the. Let's open this. The page of React. Yeah, it's the time to go to this directory that we have prepared for the workshop. For some reason, it has when the organizers, which did a great job preparing all of this. By the way, they prepared this. They touch one file, so you may have to do reset head hard.